you don't necessarily are from those.
In Mexico, we have three different cases. We have the Kehillat that includes the Jews mainly that come from Syria and.
Even though they're not really Sephardim.
I know, but
they're called Sephardim. Yeah.
They are two Sephardic communities, let's say. Okay. And even in them, there is the Ashkenazi, which is one. And then we have the Halevy and the Shaar, the one that come from Aleppo.
But those are both from Syria.
I know.
But they don't get along with each other.
They don't get along. They're
I'm aware.
themselves. But they get along with whatever, the Syrians. And then we have the one that comes from Turkey.
Right.
And that is the other big
Those Jews are Sephardim.
Yes.
Right.
No, but I meant more, I understand the origins from locations, but today you have Sephardim in America, you have Sephardim in, so, you were born here, you can say your parents.
I'm not, are you Moroccan? Are you Yemen? No, I'm San Diegan. Like I was born here. My parents are from Israel. Sure.
So there's more to being Sephardic than just.
I think today is more what you would decide to follow.
I'll tell you the truth. My personal opinion. My personal opinion is that where you come from is really irrelevant in this whole discussion of. We're so far removed from these countries, and the fact that we still identify so. Like my rabbi once said, "What is Sfarad?" It's like Spain is a country of Catholics outside of the land of Israel. Why do you feel so close to a Catholic country? It's like, why are you so proud of? He said, you're an Ashkenazi Jew, you're from Germany. It's like, are you proud of being from Germany? Like, what are you so proud of? The truth is that we're really ridiculous when it comes to these terms. What I will say though is, when someone says Sephardic versus Ashkenazi, I will tell you that there are different worldviews that came out of both of those places. Very different.
And that's what I wanted to
Very
ask.
Different.
What is the worldview? Can you capsulize it? I mean, is it possible?
You could try.
Like you said the other day, Sephardim have a different Kabbalah. So obviously there are different schools of thoughts, there are different cultures. But can you? I mean, I know.
I can try. I just don't want to be offensive. I can tell you what's come to my.
You won't be offensive. No one will take it.
Is anybody here offended by anything you say?
No, okay, so well, my wife won't.
She just meant you all want to be Sephardic.
Right.
That's a different story.
She speaks from experience.
I have to tell you, someone told me last night that they had a girl come to her and say, there's this teacher at Torah High, I don't know her name, but she's amazing. She's like, which teacher? She's like, the Sephardic one. So there you have it. That made my day, I can't even tell you.
This is fast conversion.
Some people are colorblind, who knows? But it's okay. Like this. Why and how and what I can tell you that when I started my Jewish life at my house, I was raised in an Orthodox, pretty open-minded setting of, we went to the local day schools and I prayed at a Chabad shul, and I never heard at home I knew we're Sephardic, I mean we're Moroccans, and that means that half my family has a temper and the other half, I knew these kind of things about us, right? But what did it really mean to me practically? Okay, so I use this siddur and we sing these songs, big deal. What's the big deal? And what I didn't realize is that throughout my life, as I was in San Diego, and then I went the shoulders that I went to, and then when I went to Baltimore for yeshiva, is that I was receiving a very good, high quality, but very Ashkenazi education. And I was struggling very much with a lot of the things that were being introduced to my life over the years of studying Torah. And I'll tell you that I wasn't raised ethnically Sephardic. And it might sound funny to you, but I wasn't raised at this point where I have friends that they're Sephardic and they speak even Arabic at home, and they're they're really, it's just like people speak Yiddish at home, and I don't think that today, especially not in this city, people are not so. Halevy, we should all be connected to our Jewish roots, but to the point where you guys speak Yiddish at home, or versus these people speak Ladino at home or Arabic. We're not even in that ballpark. So when we say Ashkenazi and Sephardi in San Diego, it's kind of funny because there is no such divide really. No, I know. I'll get there. But I'm telling you my personal story. So when I grew up in this kind of, I don't know how to define San Diegan Jewry. It's not modern Orthodox. It's not. Modern Orthodox is very different than if you go to the East Coast and look at modern Orthodox, it wouldn't be what you're finding here. It's also not standard Orthodox. It's very interesting. But I'll tell you, my first struggles. Yeah, you also struggled. Yeah. My first struggles when I went to yeshiva. When I went to yeshiva, I started figuring out that I had wonderful rabbis, an amazing yeshiva, that weren't Zionists. For me, that was like a boom in the face. My parents are Israeli. We grew up speaking Hebrew. For me, the flag of Israel is like, oh my gosh, it's Jewish pride in a nutshell. And I realized that there's an entire community of Jews that don't, and they're not a minority, an entire community of Jews that say, we're religious, and because we're religious and the state of Israel isn't, we'll go there to visit, that's our country to live in, but that government is not ours. We don't celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, and there's no difference to us between the chief chazan of the Israeli army and the chief chazan of the American army. That doesn't make a difference to us. That's how I was raised in the yeshiva, and that's what I heard, and that was the unanimous view of that yeshiva. When it came to Hasidim, now I grew up in a Chabad shalom. Today it's funny that people have reversed the tables on me as if I'm some big opponent of Hasidut. It's the farthest thing from the truth possible. I still am. I have a whole bookshelf over there just of Hasidic works. And when I came to yeshiva and they told me, so you can't bring those books into the yeshiva. It's like, oh my gosh, what are you guys crazy? Well, who doesn't bring these books? Do you know who this rabbi is? We don't care. That's not what we study in our school. You may say, maybe you chose the one closed-minded school in the whole world. It's not true. I'm talking here mainstream. Again, Ashkenazi is the Lithuanian, but they're the spokespeople for Ashkenazi Jewry. Mainstream Ashkenazi Jewry. I then discovered all kinds of other things. This conflict between, do you learn full-time or do you work full-time? Are you supposed to all be rabbis, or are you allowed to also go, study a secular education? Suddenly there was that conflict. Is working a thing that you do just because you have to make money to bring home? Or is there an idea, is there a passion behind having a career and building up your life financially and academically? And all these things were conflicts. And I came from a home where, to be fair, my father is a PhD. My mother has 2 master's degrees. I grew up in a very academic household. I'm the only Halevy that didn't finish college. Yes, I'm like the Nebuch in the family. Yeah, I'm the one who didn't. Yeah. But the truth is, I didn't ever know that there was a conflict between any of these things in religion. And what that did for me in yeshiva was a lot of soul searching and a lot of rebellion. I may sound funny to you. I was like the rebellious kid in yeshiva, but I wasn't the one who was, hanging out with girls and talking on the phone in the middle of the night and running around. I was the guy who was like, teaching Rabbi Kook in yeshiva and hosting Fabrengens in my dorm room, and those because those were my way to rebel. You got to show people that there's open-mindedness to Judaism. That's what I was driving everyone crazy. And then I came to Israel, and I knew that I don't know where I'm going to study Torah, but if I want to become a rabbi, I have to figure out which is the way for me. So I knew I was Sephardic. I prayed with the Sephardic Siddur. I wore Sephardic talit and tefillin, and I prayed in a Sephardic accent. But my worldview at that point in time was absolutely not Sephardic. And then I came to Israel, and I met, by sheer accident, Rabbi Peretz. It was a mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to go to that yeshiva. A whole story one day we'll share with you how we ended up there. When I met Rabbi Peretz, I hated his guts. I decided I'm going to have to leave yeshiva. I can't stay with this kind of person in the yeshiva. And then something hit me, and it hit me very hard. And it was that all the conflicts that I mentioned above exist only in the Eastern European worldview. Only. The conflict between Zionism and Judaism is not even a conflict in Sephardic Jewry. You can't list more than 2 Sephardic rabbis in your life that are not Zionists. You can't. My proof? Name me one Sephardic rabbi after the founding of the State of Israel who lived outside of Israel. One. I can name for you 12, 2 dozen big Ashkenazi rabbis, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Rabbi Aaron Cutler, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who felt that, listen, Israel is important, but we're not going there yet. Not in my tradition. I don't have one Sephardic rabbi that I can tell you who lived outside of the State of Israel. None.
But aren't they, I agree with the feeling towards Israel, but with the feeling for Israel, but that life took them somewhere else, and they can make for the Kehillat there.
Right. I live in America also.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's a flaw in living in America.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, when you look at the overall picture, this conflict doesn't exist. And I'll tell you the good side to the other coin also. I'm not just an elitist rant over here. And the conflict between working and studying Torah never existed in the Sephardic community. All of my grandparents were, both my grandfathers were rabbis. Both of them, and they both worked, and they both had jobs. And in Yemen, they didn't go to university. In Morocco, there was no such thing as high school. But they were very learned people, very educated people, not just in Jewish studies. When I look at my rabbis, I don't have rabbis that grew up in a ghetto. I don't have such a thing. My rabbis were judges on Muslim courts. My rabbis were rabbis who were very involved in the governments of non-Jews. My rabbis were scientists. My rabbis were doctors. My rabbis were professors at universities. And this is before the age of modern Orthodox Judaism or anywhere else that is establishing this Judaism and science kind of approach. This is like 2,000 years old. And the Sephardic rabbis have been doing this forever and ever and ever. The Rambam and the Ramban and all of our giants, philosophers, artists.
That's how it was in Spain.
Look at this book. You see this?
That's exactly
This
how
book
it
is
was
written
in Spain.
by Rabbi Yosef Massas, one of the chief rabbis of Morocco. And he happens to have been one of the most brilliant Torah scholars that lived in Morocco. And also one of Morocco's most famous artists. All of the artwork in this book he drew. When he wrote his books, he drew flowers on every page and decorated the corners. And he said, I'm a poet, I'm a singer, I'm a rabbi, I'm a judge, I'm also an artist. This is unparalleled in any Eastern European country.
He was a Renaissance man.
But this is a very big deal. When you
Well said.
when you find also, I don't want to extend so much into this department, but what it did do is as follows.
And also about the difference between Psak Halacha.
Right.
One was a more natural approach versus,
I didn't want to take it all the way over there, but we can go there. We can go there. The approach of Sephardic Judaism, there's good news by the way at the end of the story. The approach of Sephardic Judaism always was, Judaism is a very natural thing. Very natural. You can't be too strict because that's not the way God intended the world to be. Someone once asked me the difference in Sephardic Halacha and Ashkenazi Halacha, and I summed it up in 2 sentences. There are 2 approaches to Halacha. One is that everything in the world is prohibited unless the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, says it's okay. Which means if it's not in there that it's okay, don't do it. Stay away from it. And one approach is, no, everything is okay unless the Shulchan Aruch tells you, stay away from it. It seems to be that the Ashkenazi rabbis were always from the first approach. Everything is not okay unless it says that it is okay. And what that led to is a very insular, isolated life, which worked, because in Europe it didn't work to mix in with the non-Jews. With the pogroms and the crusades, and you didn't have that option like Rabbi Mazuz did in Jerba. There was no such thing as a rabbi sitting on a Christian court, not because he didn't want to. He didn't have that choice. It wasn't an option. You even come into this place and we'll kill you. That's how it was. So Jews developed their own little communities. Now here's what happened. In halachic terms, that meant that the Sephardic rabbis were always looking for a way to open up doors, to free people from, so to speak, shackles of prohibitions. And the Ashkenazi rabbis were the exact opposite. If it's better to stay away from something, it's better to not do it, it's better to stay, and then you ended up having this whole world of things that you cannot do, that are not mentioned in the Torah, they're not mentioned in the Talmud, they're new additions to Judaism, and that worked when you have your own little group that's living together. But what happens now in a world of 2014, where we don't have that communal life, that social shtetl, that support system, that we all do the same thing anyway, so what difference does it make if it's from the Torah or if it's from, we do things together. That whole world fell apart the moment Jews left Europe and they left Sephardic countries. And here's what happened. Ashkenazi Jewry reacted to this insular, isolationist view. It reacted with the founding of the Jewish Enlightenment movement. It reacted with the founding of the Reform movement. It reacted with the founding of the Conservative movement. What is the Reform and Conservative movement asking? And at their core, maybe today I don't know what they're asking, but at their core they were asking, why are you blocking us at every corner from trying to be more connected to this world?
Absolutely.
Why are you isolating us from other people? Why are you telling me that I can't do anything? Why are you holding me back from X, Y, and Z? Now, their answer to this question was, let's undermine the rabbinic establishment. Why? Because the rabbinic establishment isn't willing to work with us. Isn't willing to work with us. And so what happened was that the rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis, if you like to call them that, then there wasn't such a divide. They said, if you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And what happened is you didn't give them an inch, and they took like the whole baseball field. They didn't just take a mile. And today you have 2 groups of Jews that they're not even on the same page on anything. You don't find a parallel of Reform and conservative Jewry in Sephardic countries. Not because they were in some evil Arabic country that wouldn't allow for progression, but because the rabbis there were a lot more flexible.
They didn't have the need to create it.
Absolutely.
The need for the
Absolutely.
Reform, conservative, and anything else that's out there now
Right.
came out of
A need. It was a real need.
restricted and tired of being told they weren't Jewish enough.
Absolutely.
Or they weren't Jewish.
The Hasidic community developed in the
They went
same way.
somewhere else.
You know Hasidim? Hasidim today, like you say, oh, Hasidim, they're super religious. Hasidim are not super religious. Hasidim are super rebellious. Hasidim are a fanatic breakaway from Ashkenazi Jewry. Hasidim stood up to the establishment and said, we don't like your establishment, but we're not going to take it to Reform and conservative. We're going to take it to singing and dancing and teaching people Kabbalah and spirituality and all kinds of other things.
There was no Reform and conservative when the Baal Shem Tov did his thing.
In the first, already there was. The early
was?
enlightened, not
Yeah, I
Reform,
thought it started
but the
in
early...
America.
No.
Germany. Conservative in
Right, you had it in Berlin, sure.
Okay, I didn't
Now,
realize
they weren't yet labeled as Reform, but they were labeled as Maskilim, like the enlightened Jews, so to speak. The Hasidim, they were incredible. What the Hasidim did to Europe were they shook the foundation, and instead of running away, they established not just a parallel body of rabbis, but perhaps even surpassed the mainstream Orthodox establishment in stature of their rabbis, in the holiness of their rabbis, in the following of their rabbis. And they went from being this tiny rebellious group to being a group that by the time World War II came around could have even been the majority of Eastern European Jews, even though they were the rebellious ones. And nobody said, oh, they're a breakaway. Suddenly they became mainstream. What happened to Hasidim is very interesting. Hasidim ended up becoming more institutionalized and established than even the Jews were before the Hasidim came around. But that's the Hasidim's problem to work out. My wife, she's on the forefront of working this problem out. Right? But you won't find
that word. I struggle with ones that are.
you won't find, by the way, that in a Sephardic country you ever had this breakaway of Hasidim. The reason being that Kabbalah, which is what Hasidim really were trying to bring spiritual elements to the Jewish community, which was like a dry bone Jewish community. You pray, you study. If you don't study, you don't know how to read, you're nobody in the Jewish community. Hasidim brought like the heart of the Jewish community. By the Sephardic community, there was no such thing. So what if you couldn't pray? So what if you could? So you came and you sang with us, and I don't know if you've ever been to like a Sephardic bar mitzvah or a wedding or a brit. Like it's all about dancing and singing, all about Kabbalah. We Sephardim do crazy things according to Kabbalah, crazy things, not even some really out there things. So that rebellion didn't ever need to exist.
All right, I'm more Sephardic than Ashkenazi.
Wait, we're not there yet.
One down, 10 more down.
I'm reformed Sephardic.
Along comes.
I'm always ahead of the time. Always 20 years ahead.
That's the best thing we heard in this class all day. Along comes Rav Kook. Who was Rav Kook? Rav Kook was a mainstream Orthodox Lithuanian rabbi from Europe. And Rav Kook stood up to the establishment also. And he said, I don't understand you guys. He was before World War II. So the non-Jews hate us here. We have Jews that have moved to Israel to start a Jewish state. So what if they're not religious? So what if they're burning Chumashim? So what if they don't want religious people there? But if you go and help them, you'll make a Jewish state of Israel. You can't say that God doesn't want the redemption to come this way. God is bringing the redemption. He didn't ask you first. He told you that I'm sending Jews to Israel. You didn't want to go? So Hashem sent the secular Jews to go build the country. And Rav Kook was so rebellious to the point where in Ashkenaz, they didn't study his works. They burned his books in the streets. They excommunicated him from the majority of Jewish organizations and synagogues. And here's what happens. Rav Kook finds himself in Jerusalem alone. Nobody wants to know this person. Nobody wants to talk to him. And then you have something very interesting. Rav Kook says, I don't care. I'm establishing a chief rabbinate of the state of Israel. This is before the state of Israel, but he was getting ready. And he said, who's going to join me? It was quiet in the land of Israel. Nobody's joining Rav Kook because he's crazy. Along comes a rabbi named Rabbi Yaakov Meir and then later Rabbi Ben Zion Meir Rabbi Uziel, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. Do you know how many years there's been a Sephardic chief rabbi in Israel? This is in the 30s I'm talking to you about. So how long is Sephardic chief rabbi?
Until 11 years ago?
For the last 600 years there's been a Sephardic chief rabbi in Israel. I mean, there's been an institutionalized body of Sephardic rabbis in Israel. For the robe that Rabbi Yosef wore, he didn't like wake up one morning and say, I like that style, let's dress that way. That's the robe that all the Sephardic chief rabbis wore. That style with that turban.
Yes.
And so Rav Kook found no friends. And Rabbi Uziel comes along and says, this is a great idea. Because we're Sephardic rabbis, and now you have Ashkenazi Jews coming, and who's going to take care of them? So let's make a rabbinate that has an Ashkenazi chief rabbi and a Sephardic chief rabbi that work together. And so the Sephardim joined Rav Kook, and then Ashkenazim voted the Sephardim out. Because how could you join Rav Kook? But again, you never had this conflict of Zionism in Sephardic Jewry. So as much as Rav Kook came to bring a Zionist revolution, and most of you may consider yourselves Zionist Jews, most of you might consider yourselves Zionist Jews, but that was a new thing for Ashkenazim. It's a very recent thing. None of the rabbis of Ashkenazi Jewry 100 years ago felt proud about Zionism. None of them. It was a very big deal.
Well, and Herzl was a weird guy.
He was
anti-Semitic.
Right, Herzl was nuts, but it's okay.
Absolutely.
So what I'm sharing with you is that this need to start a religious Zionist movement. Bnei Akiva came out of this movement. All of the religious Zionist groups in Israel. That was wonderful, but it was only needed by Ashkenazi Jews, not by the Sephardim, who already naturally felt a relationship with Rav Kook. And then last but not least, you had Rav Soloveitchik show up on the scene. Rav Soloveitchik is a brilliant Torah scholar. And he comes and says, I don't understand you guys. Rav Soloveitchik is the grandson of the greatest rabbis of Eastern Europe. The Brisk dynasty. He is the end of the Brisk dynasty. And Rav Soloveitchik says, I'm moving to America, and not only am I moving to America, I'm not joining the mainstream yeshivas. I'm going to go to Yeshiva University. We're going to start this yeshiva that also has a university attached to it. Do you know what his counterparts in Europe were saying about him?
Oh, they must have been curious.
He lost his mind. And not only that, but Rav Soloveitchik, one in Berlin and then one in America, I think, or maybe both in Europe, goes and gets not one PhD, but 2 PhDs. And then he comes to America and says, we have to be more versed in the arts and the culture, and he starts going to the opera. And this is like the biggest rabbi who comes out of Europe, comes to America, and starts going to the opera, starts teaching people secular studies. And the whole thing was crazy. And what he started in this country was break away from that traditional model where everybody has to go to yeshiva.
Who is this?
Rabbi Soloveitchik. Right, he's the founder of modern Orthodox Judaism. And the Sephardim said, well, that's great, but we don't know what's the big deal. What's the big deal that people should, of course people should work and people should study and people should be, and so Rav Soloveitchik came to bring this message to Ashkenazi Jews, but again, for Sephardim, the message was irrelevant. You ready for the bad news?
Yes.
Then comes 1948. The founding of the State of Israel destroyed Sephardic Judaism. The founding of the State of Israel destroyed Sephardic Judaism because you had 2 things happen to the Sephardic Jews. The Ashkenazi secularists who were in Israel founding the State of Israel decided that it was their mission to fight religion. The problem is that the Ashkenazi Jews, I don't know if you know much about them, are very into tradition. Very stubborn. This is the way we do things. We're not changing.
Very Germanic.
And so they felt like they had no audience with the Ashkenazi Jews. And that's why today you have communities in Israel like Shaar, like Bnei Brak. They haven't changed in the last 100 years. They're still in the same place.
Yes.
Because they've shut themselves off from the rest of the State of Israel. And then you had, so who's the most vulnerable religious group? The Sephardic Jews. Because they never experienced the Reform movement. They never experienced they never knew that there are Jews who would ever try to get them to not be observant. And what happened was, they didn't have an immune system. And suddenly they were attacked, like a hawk attacks its prey, and kids were pulled into kibbutzim, kids were taken away from their families, my uncle's peyot were cut off when they came to Israel, so on and so forth. And then what? So those Jews all became a new breed of secular Sephardic Jews, which was unbelievable.
Well, because Ben Gurion and his team of supporters were determined that Israel was going to be like
every other
Berlin, like Paris, etc., etc., etc. They wanted all of that in place, and the Jews from the Middle East, let's say that, let's not even call them Sephardic,
weren't making them look good.
Weren't making them look
absolutely.
good. Exactly.
Absolutely.
That was it. And then look what they did to the Yemenite children. So it was a whole part of the same thing. You're going to look.
Then you have the other half. So what about those Jews that wanted to stay religious? The Jews who wanted to stay religious, like my parents and my grandparents, they said, well, we want to send our kids to religious schools. So what religious schools are there? The only schools that were there were Ashkenazi schools. And we owe it to Ashkenazi Jewry, to the Orthodox segment of Ashkenazi Jewry, for taking all of our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles into school, even if some of it came with a fight. But they at the end of the day, took them into school. And my mother studied in Bnei Brak, and my father studied also in an Ashkenazi school, and so on, myself included. And what happened was that the Jews who stayed observant and Sephardic had actually, they're Sephardic in their appearance, in their Siddur, in their customs, but not in their outlook on the world. Because they went back to be raised by the most insular of Ashkenazi Jews. And what happened was that over one generation and 2 generations, rabbis like Rabbi Yosef Masas, rabbis like the father of Rav Peretz, rabbis like Rabbi Vari Yosef, Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, Rabbi Kaduri, they all died. And the students who took over for them were all Sephardic rabbis who were trained not in Rav Kook's world, not in Rabbi Soloveitchik's world, but in the world of Ashkenazi Jewry before it took the next step to become a little bit more open-minded. And today what you have, the biggest problem with Sephardic Jews, they don't exist anymore. They don't exist. No, I'm telling you the truth. As glorious as I just made Sephardic history sound, that history came to a screeching halt. And the people today who are on the cutting edge of modern Judaism and secular studies with Judaism and working and being Jewish and all those are in the Ashkenazi camp. And the Sfaradim have never picked themselves up again and said, we don't need these new innovations. We just need to go back to a world that was wholesome, that was complete. And when you ask me, so what is Sephardic? I'll tell you that Sephardic has not, and this is where my original statement I once said in front of my synagogue, Sephardic is not about where you come from. It doesn't make a difference. You come from wherever you want to come from. It's about where you want to see yourself go. Yeah. And I truly believe that Sephardic Judaism, when I say I have the Sephardic Kehillat of San Diego, it's not an option only for people who are Sephardic Jews. It's an option for anyone who says, I don't like the other alternatives. Just like someone can have an option to become Hasidic or to become whatever else they want to become, so you have an option to become Sephardic also. It's a misnomer that you have to be born Sephardic to be Sephardic. Sephardic, in my understanding, is a philosophy. It's a way of life. It's an approach to Judaism. And it doesn't mean that the other approach is wrong, but that other approach doesn't work for everybody. Just like our approach doesn't work for everybody. There are people who hear the Sephardic approach and it's strange for them. And it doesn't remind them of anything like home. It's not anything that feels Jewish to them. And I say, kol hakavod. Kol hakavod that world exists for people who want it. But I really believe that the answer to this generation's problem is rooted in the writings of rabbis who were leading the cutting edge of Sephardic Jewry over the last 2,000 years.
So there's a group of rabbis who you would call Sephardim, their writing and their philosophy is Sephardim.
My rabbi, Rabbi Peretz, Rabbi Masas,
tried to do what he called Lehzirat HaLeshna.
Right, but even Chacham Ovadia Yosef, with all due respect, I love Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. I love Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. This is your side today. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, as much as he tried to bring back Sephardic Jewry, and he was very successful, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was the first Sephardic rabbi who put us back on the map of legitimate halachic debate. But he was very influenced by the Ashkenazi Israeli groups that were around him, to the point where Rabbi Ovadia was not as open-minded as our other Sephardic rabbis, was not as tolerant or liberal or whatever you like to use those words in a positive way as our other Sephardic rabbis. And when I look at the teachings of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, are brilliant when it comes to halakha. But when it comes to world philosophy, and my approach to Judaism and Rabbi Ovadia Yosef's approach to Judaism are two very different worlds. Two very different worlds. Even though I appreciate where his world is coming from. But it's not the world that we grew up in. It's not the world that Sephardic Jews grew up in. And when I say Sephardic here, that includes the Yemenites and the Idotim Mizrahim, all those areas. And it's not here to put a divide. It's not like there were never Ashkenazi rabbis who were out of the box. And it's not like we never had Sephardic rabbis who were very fanatic. But if you want to make the divide, that's what it was. Today, the divide doesn't have to be ethnic. That's all I'm sharing. The divide could very much be, why run in a philosophy that's only 50 years old when you can run in a philosophy that's 2,000 years old? I mean, when the Hasidic movement developed and they came with all these innovative Kabbalistic ideas, but our rabbis, the Chidah, wrote about these things 400 years ago. Rabbi Chaim Ben Attar wrote about these things 500 years ago.
But the Ashkenazi Jews didn't know about it.
Right. No, now the Hasidim.
You're not interested in knowing
The Hasidim
about
brought this to the table. The Hasidim brought it to the table.
Now it's definitely.
But Tamar, look at the opposition to the Hasidic movement.
Yeah, but even the Rabbi Tatz, who is very Litvish, what does he say? He teaches. He uses Kabbalistic
Because
he says you need to.
Right.
There's such a need.
Right.
Such a
Okay, so he's an open-minded, and Baruch Hashem, as the world goes on and the different barriers in the worlds around us shatter, so too these little divides in the Jewish community. And what I'm trying to focus on today is not the negative side of Ashkenazi, Sephardic, and maybe when I speak like that, people understand it that way. When I speak about these two, it's not one's better and one's worse. Rather, there are two different approaches. And my humble opinion is that this approach is what's going to do it for this generation. I could be wrong. I don't think so. But instead of people running away to different places, we have already a tradition that's been running for 2,000 years. So why give it up for new age inventions? I don't know why.
Well, it seems to me that, what we're talking about is there is one Judaism. It's in the Torah. That's it. But then we have all these thousands of years of interpretations.
There you go.
And it's the interpretations that divide people.
There you go.
So you've got one interpretation that feels good for this group, so we circle the wagons around you. And then there's another interpretation somewhere in Bnei Brak. They listen to a different rabbi and they circle their wagons around that rabbi.
And it probably wouldn't be good for them to be around this table.
Well, I'm just saying. So
probably
we all, I think, understand where we have differences and challenges, etc., etc., etc. So my question is, because this is what you're committed to, what is the way to open up people's minds and their hearts so that they get a sense that we are all Jews? And in fact, if you don't want to eat the potatoes on your table for Passover, and she does want to eat the potatoes on your table for Passover,
and if she wants to eat
maybe it's not so maybe it's not so horrible that the person that doesn't eat potatoes show up at your table, and maybe they could just pass
on the potatoes.
Instead of making a whole big thing. Oh my God, I can't go to his house because she's got potatoes on the table.
You're right.
I mean, how do you make a Jewish world that works? That I find particularly interesting and fascinating, and that's up to young people. We're not young here. You two are the
Speak for yourself.
young people. You two are the young people who need to come up with a team.
Yeah, you're the.
This is our team. This is our team.
But we're on the way out. We got our eggs and our veins and our boots and everything else.
So let me tell you.
That Paulette, youth has not so much to do with your mindset. Like, I feel very young in Judaism because I didn't grow up with it. So it's very young to me.
You need
That's
20 and 30-year-olds to show up at the Kehillat. That's what you need.
Let me tell you. That's a good question.
People who are younger than you, but they're not.
It's a good question.
That's right.
And having some English in the books would go a long way, because then I would come back.
We're working on getting our English book sponsored.
Sorry, I'm English speaking.
God willing. I'll share with you what I think. I think that the key to every Jewish problem is education.
Yeah.
We are the most ignorant group of Jews that ever lived on the face of this planet.
Who's we?
We, Jews, today. And I know that sounds ironic, because today you probably hear about more classes and lectures and all kinds of things than Jews ever had. It's true. We have a group of people that are studying a lot, but on a Jewish spectrum. Remember when I brought up that whole discussion about sacrifices?
Yes.
Right? And people were like, what? And I saw people's faces. I was like, wait, is this really a Jewish opinion? Like, are you speaking Jewish things right now, or is this your own new fabrication? Because when I learn Torah, it can't be that I am only studying this kind of Judaism and not that one, and I'm ignoring this one. Rather, it has to be that you study all of them. And you still make a choice. You always have to make a choice. You make a choice between 3, 4, 5 different options, but it doesn't mean that the other options don't exist. And when you teach people that all of these are it's like a big tapestry. They make up a beautiful picture that you're choosing to focus on one part of the picture because that's the part of the picture that you like. Yeah? For example, in the picture of my wife's family, there are some people I don't look at, right? Because who cares about them? But I see my wife, I see my in-laws, I see my brothers-in-law who come to visit. So when I look at that picture, I look here. My wife will look at that picture and see someone else. And everyone has that option when you look at the picture of Judaism to look at what interests me. That cannot be an excuse to be ignorant about other people. I'll give you an example. How many people do you know? Most people, when you ask me something about an Ashkenazi opinion, I try as much as possible to be as knowledgeable as I can about Ashkenazi Jewry. And not just like one kind, but a lot of different kinds. But I would dare say that if you were to ask most of other rabbis anything about a Sephardic halacha, a Sephardic custom, a Sephardic siddur, a Sephardic tune,
They know nothing.
they don't even know about
And they don't care.
And I hope that they care.
They don't think it's valid.
I don't know if they don't think it's valid. They just never had a chance to. I'm trying to be nice. They never had a chance to ever venture into that world, and that's a problem. That's a problem because even though you're an Ashkenazi rabbi, but who exempted you from knowing everything about the Jewish people? I mean, at the end of the day, we're one people.
Exactly.
I believe that we're one people.
Exactly.
Maybe someone else doesn't believe that way. When I had a friend who was Sephardic, and he said, "I don't want to marry a girl who's not Sephardic." I said, "So maybe you'll never get married?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Because when God decided that who you're going to get married to, God doesn't care if she's Sephardic or Ashkenazi. God cared that she was Jewish and from your people. So if she's Jewish and you decide that I don't want to meet half the Jewish people, so maybe you'll miss out on the girl that you're supposed to marry." It could be. It could be. And people... It goes both ways. Both of these things. It goes both ways. And here's the problem. It's a lack of Jewish education. It's a lack of education. It's a lack of knowledge. I spoke to my wife recently. I said, my biggest blessing is that the reform and conservative movements are so Ashkenazi that they don't even attract Sephardic people to them. When you read like Jewish sayings or those books on Jewish wisdom, and you see a word like oy vey. Now for some people, oy vey, oh, my bubby said oy vey. My bubby didn't say oy vey. My bubby said all kinds of other words, but not oy vey. Yeah? And if I would hear oy vey, that doesn't it doesn't play that emotion in my heart. When someone sees gefilte fish or cholent or a good potato kugel, that reminds them of their mother baking before Yontif or whatever. But my mother didn't make that kind of food, so it doesn't bring up anything in my consciousness. When I go to a synagogue and I hear, let's say someone walk. So when you walk into a very cultural Jewish group, such as your classic Reform temple, and it's all about the Jewish experience and Jewish identity and Jewish. But the problem is that it's all about Ashkenazi Jewish identity and Ashkenazi Jewish experience. Then there's going to be breakfast and there's always going to be bagels and cream cheese and lox. It's never going to be, maybe some matbucha with some hummus and some lafot put out on the... Because that doesn't happen. And so what happens is my biggest blessing. Because the Jews who say, oh, I'm Israeli, oh, I'm Sephardic, and then they go there and nothing is familiar to them. Not the songs, not the prayer book, not the tunes, nothing. So they say, okay, we have to look for somewhere else. And then they go somewhere else, it's Orthodox, and they say, this is not familiar to me. I don't know what this stuff is. And then they end up at the Sephardic Kehillat of San Diego, because we're so far the only people who are giving people that other option. At the same time, though, we sing plenty of Ashkenazi songs in my synagogue. We sing L'chadodit Ashkenazi tunes, and we dance to it, and our Hallel is an Ashkenazi Hallel, and we like these things. We like to mix it up a little bit, and we try. And so, to answer your question, you have to teach people about Judaism. You can't be ignorant and also be unified.
My question then is, how right here in San Diego, because you have to work in your own backyard before you change planet Earth. So, what does one do as a group to educate Ashkenazi young people, Ashkenazi adults in the synagogues that are around San Diego, to just have them here so they can perhaps open up to a new thought, like we're talking about here?
You start with the rabbi, and some of them are like fiefdoms. I'm sorry to say. Like what?
They're not they are. They're not let me share with you a story.
You can't get through the dictator.
Let me share with you a story. I don't find any value. I don't find any value in saying we have to promote Sephardic Judaism to Ashkenazim. I don't view it as like some let's go proselytize to different people. I'll tell you what I do feel. When I publish my book, it was very important for me that before I published my book, I would get a number of letters from my rabbis saying that we agree with what it says in the book. We agree, we support you, we know the author. Why? I know the way the Jewish community works. I wrote some things in my book that maybe to you are not so problematic, but to some other, call them mainstream, I don't know that it's mainstream, but they consider themselves mainstream. Suddenly I turned the tables and I went against the tide, not in anything innovative, just that's the way we've always done it and nobody's ever told you about it, so I'm going to be the one to tell you about it. And I told my wife, I said, I have some friends who studied with me in yeshiva and became rabbis, and then they became pretty similar to my worldview, let's say, and they're a little bit more, I try it. I'm not the most open-minded person in the world, but a little bit more open-minded than where we all came from in that yeshiva in Baltimore. And I told my wife that the difference between myself and them is they're living their whole life feeling rebellious. They feel like they broke away from the mainstream, and that every idea that they're bringing up is great, but it's different, and it's new, and it's innovative, and it's revolutionary. And part of being innovative and revolutionary is that you lose your support system. You lose the fact that you're connected to 5,776 years of Jewish history, and you can't just wake up one morning and decide that you have your own opinion and pull it out of a hat. You have to have a foundation. But the problem is they realize that their foundation is so not for them, it's so flawed in the way they see the world, that they feel like they have to do their own thing. And I told my wife, for me the biggest blessing was that I met Rabbi Peretz. Because what Rabbi Peretz did for me was, you're not rebelling. All the things that you're feeling are not rebellious. They're not even new. And Rabbi Peretz starts pulling 1,000-year-old books off the shelf that are talking about the things that we're struggling with today. And Rabbi Peretz, not in real words, but in what he was showing me was, don't rebel. Don't become a new ism. Don't make a new movement. Just show people that all the things they're feeling are valid, and there were many, many rabbis before them that agreed with them. And even though it could be the mainstream doesn't agree with it, but that doesn't make them rebellious. That doesn't make them invalid. And what I learned from this whole story was, there are so many people who want to break out of that box, and then they do break out of the box because they can't end up living in that box forever, and they do it in very unhealthy ways because they're rebelling. And when you rebel, you lose the rabbi, you lose the rebbitzin, you might even lose your family, you lose your parents, you lose the friends that are around you. People start to say things like, oh, that person, she's a little bit weird, or she always says strange things, or she believes very different than us, or whatever it is that you would hear. And what I'm trying to offer somebody is, become yourself, but don't rebel. And when you tell somebody you don't have to rebel, suddenly they feel really connected. They feel really like, wow, so I'm validated. There's something in my tradition that says that I'm right. And I'd like to hear that. And that's why I think it's important. It's not important to teach people about Sephardic Jewry. It's not. It's irrelevant. But it's important to teach people that the feelings that they have are not a new age thing that was discovered in America. But these are things that Jews have always been struggling with, and there have been very many valid alternatives. And that is important because it puts people in a very healthy headspace. It puts people in a headspace where they're doing the things that may be different, but not because they want to rebel, but rather because they want to be part of something that's very valid. And I don't know if you understood what I just told you, but that's the most important thing I said today. That's the most important thing I said today.
You could teach at the lunch and learn.
Yeah.
You could teach that at the lunch and
so
learn.
this is the message I want to bring out. This is the message. We don't need new isms. I don't need new Jewish groups breaking off and starting new ideas. We need to connect people, not to old. We're not old. We need to connect people to things that have always been around. There are people that have always been like that. There are people, I'm very proud of the fact that my rabbis were very big supporters of the Hasidic movement. Even though they weren't Hasidic, not by a long shot. Rabbi Peretz, I'll tell you a story. Where I came from in yeshiva, you weren't allowed to study the writings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Why? Because they had all kinds of bad words to say about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Why? Because the Lubavitcher Rebbe was the kind of rabbi who said, I'm standing up to the establishment, and that's what he did. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was not a mainstream Orthodox rabbi. And I'll say this so many times in my life, until even people hate me when I say it. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was a revolutionary. The Lubavitcher Rebbe fought against every Orthodox norm that existed in this country. And the sad part was that he did it alone, because no one else was there to help him. The good part was that he was very successful in fighting the establishment. But my rabbi, who grew up in Panovich, do you know anything about Panovich?
No.
Panovich was the number one yeshiva that opposed the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Opposed what?
The Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Oh, he opposed the Rebbe.
They were the number one yeshivas that said that the Lubavitcher Rebbe wasn't an Orthodox Jew. Forgive me for saying such a word because it's not true about the Rebbe, but they were like really, really against the Rebbe. And Rabbi Peretz came to yeshiva one day, and I was already, it was the first year that I was in yeshiva. And I was too afraid to ask him, like, what's your opinion on Chabad, on the Rebbe, because he's from Panovich. I assumed that his worldview was going to be very antagonistic. And so I never asked him. It was about Hanukkah time, and Rabbi Peretz comes into the class, and he is fuming. And Rabbi Peretz very rarely gets angry. But when he gets angry, he's angry. And he came into the shiur, and he's fuming. Not like angry at a person, angry about like a Torah thing. And we sit down, and he gets up and he says, there's a newspaper here, and it's called the Yated Ne'eman. It literally means the
Faithful peg.
The faithful peg. It's like, pegging us together to Jewish tradition. It's like the spokespiece of it, Orthodox Jewry, Lithuanian Jewry in Israel. And he says, whoever publishes the Yated Ne'eman, the 7th level of hell is waiting for him. And whoever reads the Yated Ne'eman is going to be pretty much close to the one who published it. Now, Rav Peretz is not the condemning to hell kind of rabbi. So I waited, okay, what happened? So today in the morning, they published an article about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And they said that he was this, and they said that he was that, and all kinds of bad things. And he said, I don't care which yeshiva you come from, I don't care what opinion your rabbi had, but you have to be a rasha, an evil person, to say something bad about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. That's what he said. And when I heard this from Rabbi Peretz, who all odds were against us that he was going to be a supporter of Chabad, I realized this is a truthful person. This person says, I don't care if my rabbi, his rabbi, was so opposed to the Lubavitcher Rebbe that he resorted to calling the Lubavitcher Rebbe all kinds of names. But my rabbi came out of Panovich and said, that's not the truth. The truth is, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, sure he was controversial. So what? He was a huge tzaddik and one of the leaders of that generation. And you have to give him the respect that he deserves. And when I heard this, I realized that's the tradition that we come from. The tradition that we come from is we argue and we're different and we don't all have to do the same thing. But we must respect the fact that each one of us has leaders that are valid. And our leaders are guiding us on a valid path. And so long as the path that we're all following is valid according to someone, we're not supposed to be screaming at each other and cursing at each other and fighting with each other. And that's the approach. That's the approach. And all this fighting you hear about of the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim and beating each other up and putting each other in prison, and it's not a beautiful history. Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who I quoted to you before, was responsible for persecuting Rabbi Yonatan Eitritz his whole life. Rabbi Yonatan Eitritz is my wife's great-great-great-grandfather. I happen to be a big fan of both of them, but they were fighting their whole life. All of these fights, you never heard about it in the Sephardic community. And that's why today's the Yortzeit of Rabbi Uziel Zionism. Because for the first time in 2,000 years, you have this last year has been a Gehenna on earth for Sephardic Judaism. You have the different sons of Rabbi Uziel Yosef are fighting with each other. The different students of Rabbi Uziel Yosef are fighting with each other. The different Sephardic rabbis who, when Rabbi Uziel Yosef was alive, were quiet because they didn't want to fight with him because they respected him. But now that he's gone, their valid opinions and they're standing up to the plate, so everyone else is excommunicating them and fighting with them. This is one of those innovations that we don't need from Europe. They should have left it in Europe. The Sfaradim should have never learned from it. We should have never caught on from it. And that's the beauty of it. The beauty of it is that we have to bring it back. It's a model that exists. And today, the best friends to bringing back Sephardic Judaism are actually going to be the Ashkenazi Jews that already realized it on their own. And that's where unity comes into play. Because that unity is going to be the one that's going to bring the redemption. That's the unity that's going to bring everyone together. And that is what I believe. I wish you have a beautiful day. That
was great. Thank you so much. That was very